This is the Low Level Hell Podcast, Episode 9.
Dog 6, go straight. I got your back, man. Any forces on the ground, you are clear to engage. Fire, take a fire.
IED placers.
Flag 6, ring of 6, fire coming from this fire. Have him come around, take over trail. Take a fire. That was quite a bit of fire there.
Heading east, going low level.
Welcome to the Low Level Hell Podcast, the program that explores the world of rotary and fixed-wing combat aviation through the exciting stories of the men and women who experienced it firsthand. Now, here's your host, U.S. Army helicopter pilot, Brian Harris.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. We got a fun one for you today, as we're joined by a longtime friend of the community who shares his experience as a naval aviator and law enforcement pilot. And of course, if you haven't already, go back and listen to episode 8, as we had a great time with Yogi, who is a bit of a character, as many of you pointed out in messages on Facebook and an email. Speaking of email, we received a question here from Sam here, and he's got a question for us here. He says, for Army aviation, is there such thing as exchange pilots? For example, in the fixed-wing community, I've heard of Navy pilots going to the Air Force and flying and vice versa. I was wondering if there was a thing for the rotor community, also for swapping of countries. Short answer is not that I'm aware of as far as inter-service, so I've never heard of any like Army guys going to fly at the Air Force or vice versa. There may be some agreements going on between the Navy and the Air Force that I'm just not tracking, but yeah, I've never seen that. As far as internationally, I know I have seen guys go fly Apaches in the UK. I think when I was a 58 guy, we had some slot in Australia. And I have seen Australians certainly flying in the U.S. Army. In fact, one of our future guests is a Chinook pilot who flew with the 101st. But it's not nearly as prevalent as you see in the fixed-wing community. But we really appreciate you sending us that question. And for those of you who have any questions, you can send them to us at questions@thelowlevelhellpodcast.com. Or if you're lazy like me and don't like all that typing, you can check out our website at thelowlevelhellpodcast.com and click on our link to send us questions. While you're there, you can check out links to our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as visit our Patreon. If you feel compelled and have the ability to financially support us, we greatly appreciate it. And of course, you won't go home empty-handed. All of our patrons get early access to episodes, and our mission pilot and flight lead tiers also receive access to bonus episodes, which are essentially a second interview with our guests where I get them to tell a cool story or share a candid conversation with me. Lastly, you can also support us via your podcast provider by clicking on whatever fancy like button they have and leaving a comment, as those greatly help the channel grow. Well, I think we can go ahead and transition to today's guest. Again, he's a great storyteller, and I think you're really going to enjoy hearing his adventures as much as I did. So stay tuned, listen in, and we'll catch up with you afterwards. All right, everybody, we got Doug Russell on the line with me. He goes by Doogie. How you doing, Doogie?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just having a cup of coffee and looking forward to hearing some of your stories. You know, we've been talking for a few months now. Actually, I guess we met kind of before the show even started. But
yeah,
once I got this started, I definitely wanted to reach out to you. And you've got some pretty interesting experiences. And of course, anyone who flies a civilianized Cobra is definitely someone I want to talk to. So
absolutely. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and
Sure.
you got to where you're at.
Yeah. So I guess I'm from all over. I grew up in a Navy family. My dad was in the Navy for 28 years. So moved around a lot as a kid. Was a brat, and then went to college at Oregon State University and went through the ROTC program there. And once I was commissioned as an ensign in the Navy, I got selected for flight school. Went out to Pensacola, Florida, went through flight school, got winged in 1988, and went to the fleet almost immediately. And I flew the Navy version of the 60 Blackhawk called the Seahawk, the SH-60B version. It's called LAMPS Mark III. LAMPS Mark III stands for Light Airborne Multi-Purpose System. The predecessor to that aircraft was called the H-2 Sea Sprite. Also did that particular mission. So the way these squadrons work is you have about 10 aircraft in a squadron, about 300 to 400 people, and you break it up into little detachments and send them out to the small boys, what we call the cruisers, destroyers, and frigates. So you'll send a detachment of 1 or 2 aircraft and about 20 or 30 guys out to sea on those small ships. And I did that for about 20 years as a Lamps Mark III pilot. Did some shore tours as well, doing some other things, but I can talk to you about the mission in a bit. And then following that, I finished my career out at Naval Air Station Fallon, where I was the executive officer of the base out there and also the commander of the search and rescue squadron out there. Those last 4 years in the Navy, I was flying the UH-1 November as a search and rescue aircraft out of Fallon, doing high altitude mountain rescue on the Navy's training range out there. And then I retired. I was recruited a little bit before I retired by the Washoe County Sheriff's Office here in Reno, Nevada, to be their chief pilot. The guy who was in the job was getting ready to retire, so they recruited me in there, and I flew with them for 10 years, flying basically stripped down civilianized OH-58 AC models and the HH-1 Hotel, which is the Air Force version of the single-engine Huey. And I can talk to you a little bit about that too if you want. So did that for 10 years, did a lot of cop stuff, went through the academy to learn how to be a cop, and then they stuck me out at the hangar. I did that for 10 years. A lot of search and rescue, a lot of firefighting, and of course a lot of chasing bad guys. And then I retired from there in February of 2019, and now I work for a major defense contractor based here in northern Nevada, doing of all things cybersecurity. And that's about where I'm at right now. I still fly. I have my own aircraft that I fly, and I also fly a Cobra helicopter, like you mentioned before, for a museum out of Carson City, which is about 45 minutes south of Reno.
Wow, that's a pretty impressive lineup there.
It keeps me busy, you know. I like to keep it interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said your dad was in the Navy. What?
Mhm.
Maybe I don't know. Maybe you mentioned it. I didn't catch it. What did he do?
Okay, my dad was in the very first class of naval flight officers, so navigators. So he was in class 1 of the Navy's NFO program. It's called Naval Flight Officer Program. And he was basically a TACO, they call it, the Tactical Air Coordination Officer in P2Vs and P3s. So he was the guy who did all the tactical stuff for chasing down Soviet submarines. Did a lot of chasing Russians. I did the same, and that's one of the missions we also did in Lamps Mark III.
Yeah, it's family business.
Yeah.
Did his job and his career inspire you, or was that something just independent that you wanted to fly?
No, it absolutely did. I'm one of those guys. I was lucky enough to know that what I wanted to do from the very beginning. I just remember my dad leaving and jumping on an airplane and going off and doing great things, and that pretty well inspired me. I knew from the age of about 3 that I wanted to fly. So I pretty much everything I did from that point on was kind of geared towards getting into the cockpit of an aircraft. I really didn't care what it was as long as I was flying.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that happened. And I went when I left. My dad was still in the service when I was commissioned, so my dad commissioned me, which was pretty awesome, and also winged me. So me and my dad have overlapping service, which was pretty cool. And so I went to flight school in early 87, January of 87, and by April of 88, I was winged and on my way.
That's pretty cool. So when you went out to the fleet, you were talking about this way to previous guests that kind of, because I never understood that, how the structure was, because I knew that you put helicopters on these little boats, but I'd never put any thought into it. Like, well, how do they get there? So you have a squadron, and then they kind of split it up and put some guys on this ship and some guys on that ship, and then maybe a carrier or something like that.
Yeah, correct. And in fact, it used to be called HSL, Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron Light. So I was in a bunch of different HSL squadrons before they transitioned to what's now called HSM, or Helicopter Maritime Strike. So when they went to the HSM concept, they also split the squadrons into 2 different types. Basically, there's the type that deploys on small ships. It's called an expeditionary squadron. And then they have ones that also go out on the carrier. So, for instance, when you've got a carrier battle group going to sea, you'll have this squadron based on the aircraft carrier, and they'll bring all their aircraft and all their people, and then they'll farm out individual aircraft and personnel to the support ships around that battle group. So let's say I'm on the Teddy Roosevelt battle group. The squadron is based on the Teddy Roosevelt. That's where the skipper is, the squadron CO. Yeah. Skipper and XO are there. And then the department heads, the O4s, lieutenant commanders in the Navy, they go out as department heads and detachment officers in charge to the smaller ships, and they'll take one or two aircraft with them and a bunch of maintainers and air crew with them, and then operate from those smaller ships to support the battle group and do that power projection from the sea.
Okay, because the Navy always confounds me. Like, there's always so many.
Still confounds me too, but
yeah, I mean, for the rest of us, we kind of hear these terms. We're like, what? So let's a department head, because I've heard that many times. I'm trying to equate that to something that makes sense to me. So that is essentially like I don't know, a company command or a detachment command or something.
Yeah. So I know in the Army, in the Air Force, in the Marine Corps, that's the first rank that wears the scrambled eggs on their cover. So it's a field grade officer, right? So that's the Navy is one of the few services where their O4s don't have the scrambled eggs on their cover, on their hat. So it's a field grade position. You're one step below a squadron CO when you're doing that. And it's equivalent, the Army confounds me. So it's hard for me to correlate it to what you guys do, but I would imagine it's a guy who's got enough experience where he can run a group of dudes on a ship. So here's the hard part about that job. So you're a detachment OIC is what we call it. And you're on board a ship who the captain of the ship is an O5, or it could be an O6. Sure. That's another weird thing about the Navy. You could be a lieutenant, an O3, and still be called captain because you're the boss of the boat.
Right, yeah.
But so the captain of the ship is typically senior to you. He's an O5, and your squadron commander is also an O5. So you're really working for two different bosses. You have an administrative commander at that point and also a operational commander. Okay. So a lot of times there's some conflicting requirements from the bosses.
Right, yeah.
So you're playing a lot of go-between to try to get things done.
Yeah. So I guess there's probably not a direct correlation, if we try to say, well, it's just like this. There's probably nothing, but I can see in certain situations, particularly deployed, I've seen situations where you would have somebody that's in charge of kind of like an outstation where you've got some aircraft there. I would imagine these department heads don't have UCMJ authority over their guys.
They do not,
okay.
And that's correct. So, in fact, I've run across that where I've had a guy who did some bad stuff, and he was taking a mast, what we call UCMJ or captain's mast, right. Which is, non-judicial punishment, where the captain, a captain at sea has a lot of power in the United States Navy. He can basically put you in the brig and feed you bread and water. No kidding, bread and water, for as long as he wants. So, when you're detached from your squadron and you're assigned to that ship, that commanding officer of the ship is now, he has NJP authority over you and your guys.
Okay. And for those listening, we're throwing a lot of terms, and this is not the legal podcast, but we're kind of going down that lane because I've always been curious. But we're talking about Uniform Code of Military Justice and then non-judicial punishment, as you just determined. But yeah, just trying to make heads of what are the authorities that these people have. But to continue to pull that thread of these little detachments, because I've also wondered this too. So if I've got like a carrier battle group, I've got a carrier and I've got a couple, I guess, cruisers and destroyers and things. I mean, what is what is the benefit to having those aircraft on those smaller ships if they're just going to be with the carrier anyway? Or do they just kind of branch out
Sure.
potentially and do stuff? Or is it just to spread the
Yeah,
wealth?
well,
I mean,
well, that's a great question because, when you think of the Navy and you think of a battle group, you're looking at a picture, you've got a carrier and a bunch of little ships steaming around it, right? That's the picture that you see when they want you to see their picture. In all reality, you're going to be 80 to 120 miles away from that carrier,
oh, wow.
operating not completely independently, but you're going to be away from that ship. So we're like an outer screen.
Okay.
A lot of people call the smaller ships missile sumps because if there's a missile or battle, somebody's coming in to take out the battle group, they're going to hit the outer ring first. So what we do in LAMPS Mark III, the Light Airborne Multipurpose System, the SH-60B, or now the 60 Romeo community, is we go out and we look for submarines, we look for surface vessels, and we are kind of like the outside fence from the carrier. We prevent people from breaking that ring and getting a shot at the aircraft carrier.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So the smaller ships are screening for the big one, and then you're essentially adding to that screen and increasing the visibility. So
Exactly right. And a lot of times we have a radar on the 60, so we will launch out there and we will provide all of that data to the carrier via our data link. Our data link goes back to the ship, and then the ship sends it to the aircraft carrier with the link 16, and that kind of fills in that big picture for the guys on the carrier so they know where everybody is and what they're doing.
yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the aircraft itself. So you said the Bravo model of the Seahawk, which, as we were talking beforehand, I guess they've upgraded quite a few times since then. But what was the capability of that aircraft? So I assume, as you just said, it had some sort of radar. It had a Link 16,
Sure.
which is a digital linkage. I assume it had the ability to drop a buoy in the water and a sonar buoy or
Sure.
something. And
Sure.
but what else?
So the 60B that I flew could carry 25 sonobuoys. So for your listeners who don't know what a sonobuoy is, it's probably about a 3 to 4 foot tall canister, about 4 inches in diameter. Inside of that canister is a long spool of wire with a hydrophone on the other end of it, and a little antenna on the top. So you punch this thing out of the helicopter, and it goes into the water. It kind of floats on the surface, but the wire spools out from it, and then you've got this hydrophone, which is basically an underwater microphone, and it listens to sounds. So what happens is when the sonobuoy hears a sound, it sends that up to the helicopter, and we analyze that sound to determine what that sound is coming from. So without getting into classified information, basically different ships and different submarines produce different frequencies. So let's say, the Red October is out there hunting down the fleet. We can identify the class and more of that particular submarine based on the sound that it is putting into the water.
Okay.
And what we do is we will set up a field of sonobuoys, and we will track that submarine, always trying to maintain what we call attack criteria. So we want to make sure that, if the bubble goes up and we're going to war, we can very quickly put, ordnance onto that submarine. Which leads me to another device that we carry, which is the torpedo. There's a lot of different models of torpedoes. Mark 46 was the main one, and the Mark 50 torpedo were the two main ones that we carried. But basically, you have to make certain criteria to put that the torpedo in the water, and then the torpedo will go active and start actively hunting that submarine. And it's got a shaped charge in the nose. So when it hits that submarine, it basically punches a hole into it, and that's going to ruin your day if you're a submarine guy.
Yeah.
So particularly the deeper they are, the worse that is.
Yeah, submarines are just not a thing that I want to be anywhere involved in.
Nor I. It's just, it takes a special breed,
Yeah,
for sure, to want to do that. So we carried sonobuoys, we carried the torpedoes, we also carried Penguin and Hellfire missiles. The Penguin is a flightless bird, so we used to joke about that because the Penguin missile was $1 million missile. So how did we end up with this thing? It was made by Norway, and somebody somewhere made a deal for a trade of F-16s for Penguin missiles. So the Norwegians got F-16s, and we got their crappy missile. But and I apologize if there's any Norwegian listeners out there. I'm sure your stuff's much better now. But back then, it wasn't so great. So basically what this missile would do, and it was a big missile, it could really put a hurt on a ship. This thing would drop off the rail. It would light up and go down range. And it was kind of like a miniature harpoon missile. So you could set in a waypoint into it, so it could come in off axis on whatever target you've got. And the way we would do that is we would go out and we could determine location of a ship using radar, which we had on board the aircraft, the APS 124 radar. Or we could also use ESM, electronic surveillance countermeasure type stuff. So we would get a signal in, and we would basically create a fix by moving in reference to that signal, and then hopefully that will give us a good enough fix to get a target put in place and then go from there.
Yeah, I'm looking at I looked it up while you were talking. I wanted to see this Penguin. I've never heard of that, and that is a weird looking missile.
Yeah, it's a beast too. I mean, when you look at the size of the missile compared to I think the thing weighed like 1,000 pounds. I don't remember off the top of my head, but they were $1 million a pop. So it's not like we were rifling those things off like Hellfire.
Yeah.
As the community progressed, we moved into the Hellfire missile system, which is a great system, I think. The downside to the Hellfire missile system is the standoff range. Mm-hmm. Typically, anything I'm going to shoot at is going to shoot back at me. And typically, if I'm going to use that, it's going to put me into that threat envelope. Mm-hmm. So, that usually is not a good thing. So we try to avoid that if at all possible.
Yeah. How many Hellfires could you guys carry?
4.
Okay.
So we carry the M299 launcher, typically on the port stub wing of the 60, and we could carry 4 on that thing. And we would have a FLIR pod up front on the nose. And in just a little trivia, the FLIR pod that we used on the SH-60B was the same FLIR pod that was installed on the F-117 stealth fighter.
Interesting.
So it had a laser system in it, obviously, for painting the target. The thing about that laser system is that it had a nominal ocular hazard distance of about 60 miles. So, and it's a class 4 laser, which means it could really put a hurt on you. You don't even know you're getting your eyeballs burned out by the thing. So it's a pretty dangerous device. And, obviously it was designed to shoot straight down through the atmosphere, not horizontally like we were in helicopters.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So you could carry 4 of the Hellfires, but you could only carry probably 1 of the Penguins.
1 Penguin, and that was it. And you could carry 2 torpedoes.
Oh, really? 2? Okay.
Yeah, 1 on each side. And you could also carry 25 sonobuoys max, and you can't reload them in flight. You have to land to reload them. Sure. So they're externally loaded. There's a grate on the port side of the helicopter with 25 holes in it, and you'd shove them in there, and then you could fire them out.
Okay.
It was pneumatically fired.
So is that kind of, it's probably, I actually just saw that on the same picture I was looking at with the Penguin, but I'm imagining that's somewhat like the Volcano Launcher.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So very similar like that. And I didn't know anything about the Volcano until like 2 days ago when I saw it in a picture.
Oh, really?
What the hell is that? Yeah. So I looked it up.
Yeah.
But,
for listeners, the Volcano Launcher is a mine dispensing. It sits on the side of the aircraft to shoot everything out to the left side or the port side, as a Navy guy might say, but just launches little mines. But yeah, it looks somewhat the same. I don't know if it's quite the same device, but okay.
Yeah. And we could also carry crew serve weapons. So we'd have like the M60 or a 50 cal. We even got a gal on there, which was pretty beastly too.
I'll tell you, and I'm going to be attacked by my attack pilot friends in the community, but the more I hear about the Navy's use of the Blackhawk, or the Seahawk, I'm just so excited about it. Like, man, I want to fly that. Like, it just sounds like a really cool mission. It's got a lot of capability, and when you compare it
Yeah.
to what an average Army Blackhawk is doing, it is a completely different story.
Yeah, and I will tell you that was the great thing about flying 60s and Lamps Mark III and the Navy was every day was different. We had a bunch of different missions we did. Primary was anti-submarine warfare and anti-surface surveillance and targeting. But we also did a lot of comm relay and other things, vert rep, moving stuff back and forth between ships,
Sure.
that kind of thing. But the downside is that taking off from the back of a frigate with a loaded down 60, you lose your engine, you're done. You're going in the water.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. And in fact, we had that happen. Maybe I'll tell you that story a little later. But that happened the opening day of Desert Storm. So
Oh, wow.
we'll go into that one later.
Yeah.
That was one of those crazy stories. So yeah, a very capable platform, really enjoyed flying it. The downside to the 60 coming from Hueys and Kiowas and Cobras is the visibility's not that great looking out the front end. We had a lot of electronics on board the aircraft, which made it heavy. We maxed out at 21,700 pounds at the time. And then they upped the weight allowance to like 23,000 pounds, which is just fat, coming off the deck off a frigate, you're only 17 feet off the water anyway. If you lose that engine, you've got really no scoop out capability. You're going to go in the water. So
yeah, and you bring up a good point because I've certainly ridden in the back of my fair share of Hawks, and it's always terrifying sitting in the back and watching them land because that the pilots can't really see where they're going. You've got the crew chiefs just hanging out the side, telling them stuff, and I can't imagine landing on those small little decks with everything pitching. And everyone gives props to the fighter guys for landing on carriers, but I'm just like, I'm thinking about the helicopter landing on a frigate, and it's like, wow, I can't imagine.
I tell you what, it's probably one of the most challenging things you can do. And when I was flying them, we weren't on goggles, so we'd bring that thing aboard at night, pitch black, nasty weather, and it would definitely get you going. It would get the heart rate going. All you had was basically line up lights and what's called an SGLI, or a stabilized glide slope indicator, and SGI. And so you pretty much had to stick to your numbers. It was an instrument approach all the way down to the deck, basically.
Wow.
So it made it challenging.
Now, I heard something, maybe it was in another episode. Now I can't even remember where I heard this, but something about hooking up the helicopter to and dragging it onto the deck?
That's called a RAST system, Rapid Assist Secure and Traverse. So basically what this thing is it's a big, probably a 5 foot by 5 foot box that's about maybe 8 inches tall. And the inside of the box is hollow, right? But it has these two beams that close into the center like a bear trap. Okay. So on the underneath side of the 60B, you have what's called the main probe, and it's probably maybe 8-inch in diameter metal probe that extends down from the belly. And what you would do is when you come in and land on the boat, you'd land over that trap, and you would have what's called an LSO, or a landing safety officer. He'd have a little bubble pop-up window that he's sitting in the flight deck, and he can see where you're at. He helps guide you into that trap, and then the beams close and they secure the helicopter to the deck. Now, in extremely rough weather, what they would do is they would have what's called a haul-down cable. This haul-down cable would be spooled out on the flight deck. You would fly over the flight deck. In the helicopter, you would lower down a cable from the helicopter called the messenger cable. That would go down to the deck, and you'd have two sailors come out. They'd grab that cable, hook it up to the haul-down cable. You would now pull the haul-down cable up into the helicopter, lock it into that probe, and then you would try to center yourself over the trap. The landing safety officer would apply 3,000 pounds of pressure on that cable. So it's not quite enough to pull you down, but it's enough to guide you down into the trap when the deck is really rolling, pitching and rolling. So we would use that very rarely. It's almost like a rite of passage, or almost kind of like a manhood thing.
Right.
You want to get aboard without having to use that thing if at all possible.
Yeah.
We had to keep current in it, but if you catch a lot of crap from your buddies if you couldn't get it in the trap.
Right. Man, I'm sweating just thinking about it. So I can't imagine doing all that.
Yeah, it's fun times. I tell you what, flying off a small ship during the daytime, it's a blast.
Yeah.
Other than nothing to see but water. But it's a blast. Coming on board and taking off is a lot of fun until it gets dark. Then it's not much fun. And then when the ship starts moving around, that makes it even less fun because typically, like I said, you're 80 to 120 miles away from the aircraft carrier or anything else. And if you're independent steaming out in the middle of the Pacific, you've got nowhere to go. You've got to get it on board or else you don't get pizza.
Yeah, that's stressful just thinking about it. And every Navy guy I've ever talked to who flies, doesn't matter what they fly, that seems to be the recurring themes. Like the scariest, hardest, most dangerous part of being a naval pilot is landing, because you've got to land on these incredibly small areas in the middle of nowhere, and you can't mess it up. There's nowhere else to go.
Yeah, exactly right. Having flown in combat, I'll take that over flying back on board the boat at night. I definitely would.
Wow.
Really. I mean, it can be that stressful.
So I do want to circle back to one thing I meant to ask you. You were talking about the sonar buoys and all the weapons and stuff. Did you guys also have something that you could? I've seen aircraft where they could drop something, but it was still attached to the aircraft, some sort of buoy or sonar.
Yeah, so we had a couple other things. The 60 Romeos have what's called a dipping sonar, which is it's got like, I don't know, 5,000 feet of cable or some crazy thing on it, where you can lower this hydrophone into the water, and it can work passively or actively. In other words, it can listen to sound coming in, or it can ping and send sound out and wait for reflected energy to measure it that way. We did not have that in the 60B.
Okay.
But we did have something called a magnetic anomaly detector, which if you look at the starboard side near the tail of the 60B, you'll see a little yellow and red missile-looking thing. That's actually a big magnetometer. So what we do is once we get airborne, we'll spool out the cable on that thing. It usually hangs about 180 feet below the helicopter, and when you're moving at about 60 to 80 knots, it's going to fly back behind you a bit. And we would use that to develop our attack criteria on a submarine. So it's like a heartbeat monitor, right? So you're looking at this monitor and it's flat line, and when you fly over a large ferrous object like a submarine, you'll get like a big heartbeat bleep in the line. And that's, okay, I just flew over to something big and metal. So you would start what's called a MAD hunting circle. A MAD is a magnetic anomaly detector, like I said. So you're flying along looking for the submarine. The sensor operator in the back of the helicopter, when he sees that thump in the flat line, he calls out madman, madman, madman. Madman is what I'm saying. He'll call that out, and you'll immediately go into your turn and start working that circle. So you'll develop a course and speed because he can mark that first madman, shows up on your tactical plot, and then the next time you get one, you get another point. So you've got 2 points now you've got a course and speed, and that's how we develop attack criteria also, completely passively.
Did you guys carry extra fuel tanks or just internal?
You can carry an external fuel tank. We typically did not. I know the Foxtrot and hotel versions of the 60 that the HS squadrons that were typically based on the aircraft carrier, they would carry them all the time, particularly guys who were doing plane guard. In other words, they're out flying in circles for like 3 or 4 hours, waiting for the jets to come back and land. They would have the tank on so they could stay on station.
Okay, and they're just hanging out in case somebody has to ditch or something.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So
boring job.
When you guys were doing, I can imagine. When you guys were doing the sonar stuff, so somebody was on board the aircraft. They're the ones interpreting all that data. It's not being sent back to someone else and they're doing it, and you're just carrying their mail.
Well, that's a great question because we have a data link. It was called Hawk, the Hawk link, a very very specific to the SH-60B. So it wasn't a Link 16 between the ship and the helicopter. It was the Hawk link, and it was highly directional, and it would work. You could get a good directional link up to 80 or 100 miles, depending on the atmospherics of the day. But we would gather that data, and it would go down the link to the ship. So you would have basically a sonar operator in the ship, basically analyzing that data, and our sensor operator on the helicopter would also analyze the data. They had two different types of displays.
Okay.
So the guy on the ship could do a better analysis because he was getting all that raw data and he could see a lot more. Whereas on the helicopter, we had a smaller system, so not quite as powerful, but we could still do a pretty good job.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. So you said would you say 88 was when you got out to the fleet?
Yep. I was winged in 88. I went through the fleet replacement squadron and showed up at my first squadron in 89. And that was HSL 44 in Mayport, Florida. And immediately pretty much went to sea. So I showed up as a young ensign there in 01, 0-0 basically. And I came into the squadron, and I happened to have a degree in technical journalism from Oregon State. So they immediately made me the public affairs officer, which sucked balls. I really don't. It's not my thing anyway.
Right.
But the good news is the guy who I relieved as the public affairs officer was down in Roosevelt Roads, Puerto Rico, part of a workup. We call it a workup prior to deployment. He decided he was going to climb a tree and get a coconut and put Rome in it, right? Well, he fell out of the tree and completely shattered his arm, and I got called. I had been in the squadron for maybe a month, and they're like, hey, you're good. You're getting deployed. So I had like maybe a day to get my crap together, get packed, and I got on an airplane, and I met the detachment out at sea and went on deployment. It was a pretty historic deployment. This was in 1989. We actually went into the Mediterranean. This was aboard the USS Kaufman, which is a frigate. And we did nothing but hunt Soviet subs the entire time.
Wow.
We tracked a lot of Soviet subs. And back then we weren't buddy or anything. They were the bad guys.
Right.
So we tracked them, made a lot of cool port calls. That's one of the pluses of the Navy is you get to go to a lot of cool places.
Yeah.
And one of the most interesting port calls we had was we went into the Black Sea and we went to a town called Sevastopol, which is part of the Soviet Black Sea Fleet. They had not had anybody from the American Navy or anybody else pull into port in Soviet Union in like 45 years or whatever it was.
Wow.
So we got to pull into Sevastopol and got to go see a bunch of Soviet ships and submarines and helicopters. I actually got to sit in a Hormone helicopter, which is kind of like their ASW helicopter, and talk with a Russian helicopter pilot on board the Moskva, which was an old ASW carrier, ASW cruiser. Basically, it was like had a huge, big, flat flight deck on the back and looked like a destroyer on the front, but it was a pretty cool ship. So we got to spend some time checking them out. So it was a pretty neat deployment. But the thing is, and this is how I got my call sign. I came back from that deployment, and basically, your first deployment, you're a second pilot. You're what we call an H2P, helicopter second pilot. So you can't sign for the airplane. You're not the pilot in command or anything like that. You're basically, and you would swap back and forth between being the guy driving the helicopter and the guy doing the tactical side. Every day you'd swap back and forth. Sure. When you get back to the squadron, you do what's called your hack board, or helicopter aircraft commander board.
Okay.
You go through the hack board, and they give you a check ride, oral board, and all that stuff, and they say, okay, you're good to go. You can sign for the airplane. You're now an aircraft commander. Well, I was still I think I was in 01 I had been selected for 02 when I made aircraft commander, which was super, super early. I think I was the youngest aircraft commander in the Navy at that time. So I got the call sign Doogie Russell boy pilot. And it was based on the whole Doogie Howser boy doctor kind of thing.
Okay.
It was popular at the time. So that's where my call sign came from.
Okay, that's pretty good. Well, that's a pretty amazing first tour. I mean,
Yeah, and that was only the first deployment. Almost immediately after that, I made hack and I got put on a second detachment on board the Halliburton. Halliburton was a frigate also, and we got sent over to the Persian Gulf on this deployment for Desert Shield, Desert Storm. And we operated with the America Battle Group, did a lot of work in the Red Sea, and then moved into the NAG, the Northern Arabian Gulf. Worked with a lot of different ships, worked with some Army guys flying Little Birds as well.
Okay.
And, did all that crazy stuff up in the Northern Gulf.
So this was the Iranian gunboat Operation Prime Chance time period.
That was right. Yeah, right. Okay. It was 1990 to 91.
Right. Okay.
So the opening days of Desert Storm was like January 17th of 1991, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So and you stayed there for Desert Storm?
Yep. And a little bit afterwards, and then came back middle of 90, maybe it was 90. Yeah, it was middle of 91, mid to late 91. Got back, and I was made the assistant operations officer for the squadron, and then I selected to go to Naval Postgraduate School to get my master's degree. So I did that next.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about Desert Storm. Anything
Sure.
kind of exciting there? Like kind of just walk us through that experience.
Sure. So it was interesting because I think at the time we had like 5 aircraft carriers working in the Persian Gulf.
Yeah, it's busy.
Which is just unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, you consider the Persian Gulf is only about 130 feet deep, most parts of it. So we had submarines in there too that were longer than it was deep.
Wow.
In the Persian Gulf. So we had a huge number of aircraft in the Persian Gulf. We would basically have an aircraft airborne 24/7, 365. So we were a 2-plane detachment, and we had 6 pilots. So we were constantly, you go out, you do 2 bags, so basically about 8 hours worth, and you'd hand the aircraft over to the next crew. They go out and do 2 bags. And about that time, you'd roll the other aircraft out. The 3rd crew would get airborne. The 2nd aircraft would come down. They do all the daily and turnaround inspections on that. And we did that for like 3 or 4 months.
Gosh.
Just nonstop.
I can't imagine the maintenance keeping up with that.
It's crazy. I gotta tell you, the maintainers that we had, these guys, they would bust their ass. They were nonstop. And they were basically what we call port and starboard. In this case, they were 12 hours on, 12 hours off. Yeah. So they would do full-blown, full-phase maintenance on these aircraft at sea, changing engines, pulling rotor heads, all of that on a ship at sea, in a tiny little hangar.
Yeah, that's no joke. I mean, that's a lot of work and trying to keep that much going in such. I mean, with 2 aircraft, and I'm sure you guys were swapping aircraft out from other ships at some point.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. In fact, we lost an aircraft on the first day of the ground war, and I'll save that story for later if you want, or I can tell it now. Either way, I've got 100 different stories.
Yeah, go ahead now. Tell us.
Okay, so it was one of those days. It was the opening day of the ground war, and I will tell you that we were told in the Navy we have what's called a ROCPO, and for the life of me, I can't remember what it stands for, but what it means is these are the missions you are authorized to do with this particular aircraft. So in the Navy, for the combat search and rescue role, we were only authorized for daytime unopposed combat search and rescue. So in other words, we can't go doing CSAR at night, and we can't go doing CSAR when there's any kind of a threat.
Right.
Well, going into the first day of the ground war, we got a message that, hey, we fully expect to have between 16 and 20,000 casualties for the opening day because we're going to do an amphibious landing in Kuwait.
Yeah.
That was what they were putting out to everybody. And we got told, we don't give a what your ROCPO says. You're going to go do CSAR on the beach pulling guys off the beach of Kuwait. So we're like, holy, okay, this is the real deal. So anyways, we're getting ready to do that. And long story short is that didn't come to be because the whole Schwarzkopf end run all the way around and down from the north, if you study your history about Desert Storm, caught the Iraqis completely by surprise and ended up being, a pretty substantial victory for us. But up until that point, they were telling everybody, even in the United States side, friendly forces, that, hey, this is what's going to happen. And if you'll recall, this was a huge coalition of people. We had Germans and French and Brits and all kinds of different ships out there doing stuff, supporting this coalition. But anyways, the first day of the war, I come back from doing, I guess it was maybe about an 8-hour, 2 bags of flying from basically midnight. No, it was from, I guess it was 8 o'clock, whatever it was. I don't remember the time, but I landed at about 1600 local time, right? So I'm doing a hot swap. So basically the bird is sitting on the deck spinning. It's in that trap and secured to the deck with that. Chocks and chains are on. They come out and they fuel us up. They load us up with whatever ordnance we need. And I turn the bird over to my 2 roommates, right? In a ship, on a frigate, you get 3 officers in a room that's probably the size of a normal bathroom in a normal home, right?
Right.
So you're stacked up 3 guys in there. So my other 2 roommates, I'll just call them Don and Tony, they get into the aircraft, right? And at the time, we had what we called THP3. So the 60 had what's called a tape handling package unit that you could load tactical data and stuff like that. Well, we didn't use it in the 60, but we had a Sony Walkman cassette player that we would jack into the ICS. And I had this big box of cassette tapes, right? And, the guys jumped in the helicopter. Hey, can we use your tapes? Because, all we're doing is flying around doing radar sweeps. Because by now we've got air superiority.
Right.
We get the occasional small boat comes out. We take care of that. But it gets pretty boring sometimes.
Sure.
So, and we'd been told, yeah, we're probably not doing this big, full-blown combat search and rescue thing. So we're kind of backed off from that. So yeah, sure. You guys want to take my tapes? Go for it. I've got 100 tapes, all of them with Doug Russell written on them, right? Which will come into play later. So, anyways, they jump into the aircraft, and I'm standing there in the port helo hangar, looking through the little window there, watching them take off. So they pick up, and then the 60, you pick up off the deck, you back up. You're in about a 20-foot hover. You kind of back up the glide slope a little bit, put in a pedal turn to the left typically, so the pilot still has a visual side. Who's sitting in the right seat. He can see the ship.
Right.
He pulls power, transitions. You're looking for 3 rates of climb and airspeed off the peg and all that stuff. And your stabilator on the 60 also automatically programs. So you want to make sure that's programming properly. So anyways, these guys do their pedal turn, they pull power, number 1 engine explodes. About 30 feet of flame comes out the back end, and they kind of
wow,
settle into the water. And I see this thing hit the water. By now I'm out on the flight deck. The crash alarm is going off. And I'm watching the helicopter. It hits the water. It rolls to the right. I see the left-hand door pop open. And as it rolls over to the right on its belly, the tail comes up in the air. All the blades have just flown everywhere.
Yeah.
The tail rotor spins like 3 times, and the thing just goes bloop right down to the bottom. Right.
Wow.
So my 2 roommates and an air crewman are in this thing. And I'm like, oh boy, this is bad. So the ship goes to GQ, basically. They're launching the motor whaleboat and everything, and I see 1 head, 2 heads, and then finally the 3rd head pops up out of the water. So everybody makes it out. So here's what happened in the helicopter. Don, who was in the right seat, they hit the water. They hear the explosion, right? So they both jump on the controls. We're fat, right? Like I said before, it's a fat helicopter, got all this equipment. They're wearing chicken plates,
Yeah.
right? So you can either wear that chicken plate. The way I wore my chicken plate was I had my SV2, which is your survival vest with your flotation and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I had that on, and then I would set the chicken plate on my lap, and then I would put the straps for the seat over the chicken plate.
Mm-hmm.
So when I released the straps, the chicken plate would fall away and I could get out, right?
Okay.
They both had the chicken plate on and then put the SV2, the survival vest, over the chicken plate and zipped it up that way. And that's how they had it. So they hit the water. Don cycles his emergency window release in the right seat, and the window doesn't come out because all that water pressure on the outside of the helicopter is holding that window in.
Sure.
Because when you hit that release, it pops out. He can't get it to go out, so he now is kicking the window as hard as he can to get out. He eventually kicks the window out. He swims out of the cockpit, starts to sink because he can't get rid of his chicken plate, and he inflates the flotation. He pulls the two beaded handles. Inflation inflates around his neck and his chest, and he pops up to the surface, right? The guy in the back, Scott, he had what's called a HEEDS, which is a helicopter emergency egress device, which is a little tiny oxygen air bottle, basically. It's got about 3,000 psi of air in it.
Yeah.
It sits in a little vest pocket. He sticks that in his mouth. He just rolls out his window before the aircraft basically even hits the water because he knew it was going bad.
Sure.
He gets out, no problem. Well, Tony is in the left seat, and that's the side that had the door pop open, right? So he has now taken his right hand, reached over his head, grabbed the door sill of the helicopter on the left side of the door sill, and he is pushing himself with his left hand out of the seat when the door slams shut on his hand. Okay, so now his hand is trapped in the door. His helmet is now pinned between basically what we call the B pillar, the door pillar, and the seat. So his helmet's stuck.
Yeah.
And he told me, he said, well, I guess I'm done. This is how I die.
Wow.
And the aircraft is going down, and then he starts thinking about his wife and his kids and everything. He says, screw that. I'm not dying this way. He manages to pull his hand out of the door. He gets his helmet undone because his helmet is now jammed. He unstraps his helmet, swims across cockpit, goes out Don's window because the door's now slammed shut. He comes up out of the water, can't reach his beaded handle, so he can't inflate the lobes on his survival vest. He gets about 2 nostrils and half of his mouth out of the water, and he goes, help! And then he starts to sink. Don, because he came up right underneath Don.
Right.
Don grabs him by his hair, pulls him up, and then inflates his lobes for him. So Don saved Tony's life. We get the motor whaleboat which is it's just a boat on the boat,
Yeah.
a little tiny boat. It gets underway, pulls the guys out of the water, and we get them on board. Everything's good. He's still got his wedding ring was crushed, or not a wedding ring. He had a different ring on his right hand, and that thing is crushed. They had to cut it off his finger. He still has that. So yeah, that was the first day of the ground war for us. And of course, in any kind of aviation mishap, we have to send a flash message, which means you have to get word back to all the people about what happened within 15 minutes of occurrence.
Yeah.
So I send the flash message back because I'm the operations officer for the detachment. I secure all the maintenance records in case it was something we did wrong, all of that stuff. And this is my first wife. I'm on wife number 2, wife number last. But anyways, my first wife is watching CNN, and here's General Kelly. It's the first day of the ground war, so there's a billion things going on.
Yeah.
And he's just reading through these reports of different things that are happening in the war. And he gets to the one about us, and he goes, aircraft on board USS Halliburton crashes in the water, unknown any survivors. Next story.
Gosh.
Boom, right? So my wife back home thinks that I'm dead.
Yeah.
Or, and it's a small group. We're talking, there's only 6 pilots. So, 2 of them are dead.
Yeah.
That's what they think.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was that story. It turns out everybody was fine. Guys were back flying within about 4 days. And we continued on. We ended up cross-decking another helicopter on a ship that was leaving the Gulf. So we took that helicopter on board, so we had a full board thing. But interesting thing is we put a buoy on top of where this helicopter was. And like I said, water's only 130 feet deep. We go launch every day, and you could see that helicopter on its belly all the way down at the bottom of the Gulf. You'd fly over it every day, see that thing.
Really?
Yeah. So the war ends. They pull this helicopter out of the water, and it comes up, and they find cassette tapes with my name written on them in the engines, in the rotor system, in the tail. Yeah, these things had floated out of the box and worked their way into every nook and cranny.
Oh
on
my
this freaking
gosh.
helicopter. Yeah, so I had to talk to the mishap board about, hey, Doug, is there a reason your crap is in every part of the helicopter? Yeah, that was a fun time.
Wow. So, I mean,
Yeah.
what did they determine happened?
So the helicopter, so the Navy has, at the time, had Commander Naval Forces Atlantic and Commander Naval Forces Pacific, ComNav Air Lant, ComNav Air Pac. We were Air Lant. Air Pac knew that the engines had a defect in them, that every once in a while a vibration would occur in one of the turbines,
Hmm.
and it would basically just explode and tear the engine up.
Wow.
Air Pac didn't tell Air Lant about it. So ended up being that was what caused the mishap. So it wasn't really counted against anybody. But I think that mishap probably led to a lot of things being consolidated also.
Yeah.
So
It's unfortunate that it takes those things to cause change. I was actually just a investigating officer about 2 years ago for a fatal Black Hawk crash in Louisiana, and it was kind of the same thing. There was a known defect in the engine, and they were going through the process of changing these engines, and it was something very minor, but it just time ran out on this particular aircraft. So yeah, I've seen video of aircraft going into the water. There's one, you've probably seen it too. I think it's an old CH-46 trying to land on the back of a frigate or something, and it gets its tail wheel caught on some sort of rigging, and I mean it just disappears into the water. And
yeah,
I think for the layperson, you think about it, you think about the aircraft hitting the water and just kind of floating there or something, but they just go right down.
Yeah, it's like dropping a brick in the water, really.
Yeah.
I mean, the water comes rushing in. We all go through that water survival training, the helo dunker stuff. You had to do that all the time, every 4 years at a minimum, or prior to every deployment, kind of a thing. So, yeah, it's crazy stuff.
Yeah, we had to do that too in the Army, but you really didn't have to do it the way you guys do and get recertified. I only did it the one time my whole career, but we just going through, I can picture some of this panic, because it doesn't matter if it's training or real life. Like when you put somebody underwater and put them in these weird situations, your body just reacts and does not like what's going on. But I remember practicing all those things, like you said, kind of going across cockpit and everything. And those HEEDS bottles, the one thing that the problem with the HEEDS bottle, probably not operationally, but certainly in training, is they don't always fill them back up, because the HEEDS bottle, I think, is about 2 minutes of air, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I remember going through a scenario, in the dunker training, they put you in this big cockpit looking thing and they dunk you in the water, and it may roll over, or they may blindfold you, and they do different things. And in this one scenario that we were doing, we had HEEDS bottles, and I took one breath of that thing and that was it. It was out. And there's nothing you can do at that point, and you're just kind of
That's a great feeling, huh?
Oh god, just terrible. But yeah, that's no joke, man. I'm obviously very glad to hear they made it out of that, because that's just tragic.
Oh yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
Wow, that's incredible.
Crazy times.
Yeah. Okay, well, so any other excitement in Desert Storm, or did it finally taper down after that?
It was interesting. I had another instance where I was flying the night shift. Basically, I came back and landed. We were getting gas. It was like 3:00 in the morning, pitch black. So we're sitting on the flight deck with the fuel hose stuck into it, and I'm sitting there, and I see something in the peripheral vision out to the right. And like I said, it's pitch black out, so I see what looks like maybe a little pin dot of light, and I look, and it's a flipping missile right? And it is flying right at the ship, and it literally goes right over the helicopter.
Wow.
Right over the helicopter. And I'm like, holy, we're getting shot at. So I told them to disconnect us, and I wanted to get the hell off of the boat, right? Because that's one big target. So we get launched, we get off, and it turns out nobody knows what happens, right? So I come back and I land, and it's like 8 o'clock in the morning. I walk into the wardroom, which is where the officers eat their meals. And I got my bowl of cereal or whatever, and the captain of the boat comes in, really good guy. He sits down and says, "Hey, Doogie, how's it going?" I said, "Good, sir. How about that missile last night?" He goes, "What?" I go, "Uh-oh." So apparently nobody on the boat told him that we almost got hit by a freaking missile.
Wow.
And he went ballistic. Yeah, he fired like 3 dudes that day when he found out about it. I felt a little bad, but then again, do your freaking job,
That's incredible.
Yeah. So apparently that was a missile. We don't know what it was. It might have been a Scud. We're not sure. But it went right over the flight deck, right over the helicopter.
That's incredible.
Pretty crazy stuff. Yeah. And, there's all kinds of stuff. I'm sure you have the same kind of stories, stuff that nobody ever hears about that goes on. And you tell your friends, they're like, "Oh, bull, that didn't happen." I'm like, "Dude, trust me. Some crazy stuff happens."
Yeah.
Just some crazy stuff.
Well, I mean, this is the gold mine, because this was the whole point of me starting this podcast. Was you're exactly right. There's so many stories that a lot of us kind of grow up and it's like, well, that was a thing, and a missile flew over you, and probably to you, at the time, of course, it's exciting, but 10, 20 years later, you're like, yeah, that was a thing that happened. But no, like, that's not just a thing that happens. That
Right?
needs to be something that somebody talks about and remembers. So yeah, and I think Desert Storm is one of those where there's so much that went on, but it happened in such a short period of time that
Yeah.
it just
What was it, 100 days or something?
Yeah, and I mean, and the ground war was what, like 3 or 4 or something. So
Yeah, pretty short.
there's so much that's wrapped up in those 100 days that that no one really has pulled the thread on it, at least from the helicopter side. So yeah, we'll have to kind of circle back in the future and explore some more of that, because I do want to move on. And
Sure.
so Desert Storm, we got through that. Well, I mean, did you have any other big sort of deployments? I mean, obviously you guys are always, quote unquote, deployed to sea, but
Sure.
what other kind of adventures are going on?
Sure. So I went to PG school after that, got a master's degree in information technology, which is how I ended up being a cyber guy now. But did that in Monterey at the Naval Postgraduate School, which is a pretty cool place to be.
Yeah.
And then from there, I went to a destroyer squadron to do what they call a disassociated sea tour, which means I'm not in a flying billet, but I am doing a Navy job that has some aviation nexus. So I'm doing that job, and I was on board the Abraham Lincoln for that deployment to the Middle East, into the Gulf.
So was that like staying at the Hilton after staying at Motel 6 when you're coming off the little ships and then going on a carrier, or is it pretty much the same?
Actually, I will tell you that the carrier sucks compared to a small boy.
Yeah.
And here's the reason why. It's 6,000 people, okay? You're never going to know everybody. On a frigate, you've got 180 people. You're going to know everybody. On the carrier, it's loud all the time.
Yeah,
I lived right underneath the number 2 JBD, jet blast deflector. That was where my room was. And all the piping for that JBD went right through my room. So it was super freaking loud, particularly if there was an EA-6B on the Cat, which is the loudest airplane that the Navy had at the time. Just super, super loud aircraft when it's on the Cat ready to launch. And of course, the JBD going up and down and guys shooting off the bow and everything else. It was just miserable, noisy. And I was on a SHU staff. What that means is I was on a surface warfare officer staff, not an aviation staff. So I was not flying. I got to fly a couple of times. Got to fly in an S3 front seat in the FC. So I got to do a launch in a trap in an S3, which was pretty cool. And I got to fly with the helicopter squadron on board, flew the 60 Foxtrot and the 60 Hotel. But overall, I'd say that tour sucked because I wasn't in a squadron,
Sure.
you know. But after that, I went to the wing, which is kind of, they own all the squadrons. So I went to Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron Light Wing Pacific out of San Diego. And I was the tactics and training officer there until I selected for '04. And then when I made '04, I screened for department head and I got sent to HSL 51 out of Atsugi, Japan. So I did my department head OIC tour out of Atsugi, Japan, and did a lot of flying there. We were forward deployed, so we were always at sea. Out of the 36 months there, I spent 30 of those months at sea.
Wow.
Just being on different ships. I think I deployed on like maybe 5 or 6 different ships. Most of them were frigates. Went out on a couple of destroyers. Never did a cruiser tour. I've been on one for short periods of time, but never did a deployment on a cruiser. Did that. We spent a lot of time off the coast of Korea, north and south, doing stuff there. We worked with the Army a little bit too out there, vectoring them in on different targets. Also spent some time down in East Timor, flying SEALs around. And then when I completed that tour, I went to Naval Forces Europe out of London. So I was the exercise director for Naval Forces Europe. So I would basically plan and execute 200 exercises a year, all of them from little small level, unit level exercises to full-blown multilateral joint exercises involving literally thousands and thousands of troops and sailors and everything else. So that's kind of what I did.
So Monterey, San Diego, Japan, London. I mean, thank you for your service.
Yeah.
I mean, this was really.
Oh, thanks.
Very,
I'd be lying if I told you. It was fun though. Yeah, there's a lot of things you miss when you're in the Navy. You miss a lot of birthdays, funerals, weddings, and stuff like that. But you also get to do a lot of stuff that most people don't. So after London, I got orders out to Fallon, Nevada. I had to look on a map to find out where the hell that was.
Yeah, I've never heard anything good about Fallon.
Well, I tell you what, man. Here's the thing. I got orders to Fallon. They asked me what I wanted to do. I said I'd love to go back to a flying billet. They said, well, we've got a billet out at Fallon where you'll be flying helicopters, the SAR squadron there. You'll run the SAR squadron. I'm like, great, sign me up. Oh, by the way, where's Fallon? They said, oh, it's in Nevada. I'm like, Nevada? What's the Navy doing in Nevada? There's not even water in Nevada. Yeah. Well, there is. It's where Top Gun is. It's where Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center is. Now it's called something different. But they have Top Gun, Top Dome, basically the helicopter version of Top Gun. All of those big postgraduate level, basically aviation type schools are right there in Fallon. And they said, you'd be the executive officer, so number 2 guy there, and I got to basically fly just about every day, and I got to run the base, which was a blast. And here's a funny story. We get orders to Fallon, and we're in England, and we're like, well, I guess we better go check it out and go buy a house or whatever. So the wife and I get on an airplane. We come into Fallon. We land in Reno, and we get a car, and we're driving to Fallon, which is 70 miles east of Reno. So which means it's basically almost dead center in the middle of nowhere. So we're driving out there, and it's like January 2nd, and it's dry, it's drab, it's nothing but desert. Yeah. And the further we got from Reno, the bigger the tears coming out of my wife's eyes were. And she's just like, oh my God. She goes, where did the nuclear weapon go off? I said, what are you talking about? There is no life out here. There had to have been a nuclear weapon that went off out here. But we got out there. I will tell you, it was the best 4 years in the military I ever had. And when we left, my wife cried just as hard leaving as she did going. Because I think really in the military, what makes it is the people. It's not necessarily the place or what you're doing, but a lot of it has to do with the people you're working with. And I just had a fantastic group of folks I was working with. Just really a phenomenal tour. I got to fly every day. I got to run my own little squadron of Hueys that we were doing high altitude mountainous search and rescue. Did a lot of rescues while I was out there. Just a really fantastic tour, a great way to end my tour in the Navy.
Yeah, that sounds like a good gig.
Yeah,
No, it's good.
it was.
So then you retired and you transitioned into the civilian life, kept flying with the police,
Yeah.
which sounds like great timing on your part as far as the one guy was leaving and they needed someone to
Yeah.
fill the slot.
Yeah, it was. I was at a meeting. The hospital in Reno was getting a helipad on the roof, so they had the big meeting between all the air units in the local area that might deliver people to that unit. And I happened to be there, and I saw these three cops over in the corner, and they were kind of looking at me, kind of whispering back and forth to each other. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to go find out what this is about. So I go walk up and I introduce myself, and the guy who's now passed. He died from cancer, but at the time is a great guy, Tom Delaney. He was an Army aviator who flew just about anything, really. He was just a phenomenal pilot. He was a Warrant 5, but he was also a deputy and the chief pilot there. And he says, hey, I'm Tom Delaney. I've met you once before. I said, yeah, you look familiar. We'd met somewhere doing something. And he says, hey, when are you retired? I said, well, it just so happens I'm retiring in about 6 months. He goes, you want to come fly for us? I'm like, does a chicken have a pecker? Yeah, I want to come fly for you, So we got that all coordinated, and then I got recruited. They originally recruited me to be a civilian pilot, and I said, well, in order to figure out what the guy on the ground's doing, shouldn't I ought to learn what the guy on the ground's doing? They said, okay, well, do you want to go through the academy? I'm like, well, yeah, I guess so. So I went through, it was about a 4-month academy, police academy. So I was the old guy in the group. I was 44, turned 45 during the academy. And everybody else was 22, 23, And of course, at that time is the generation, the Xbox generation. So they all, let's just say that I don't think they expected the physical performance that I was able to provide because, I'm not an Xbox guy.
Right.
I still had to maintain my health and physical condition. So, they all made fun of me until I started kicking their ass in the runs and the fighting and all that stuff. So, I gained a little bit of respect that way. And I got done with the academy, was commissioned as a deputy, if you will, and went to patrol training. Did that for about 12 weeks, where I drove a patrol car, had my training officer sitting with me, and I did regular street cop stuff. And then after I completed that syllabus, I went out to the hangar and I stayed there and flew lots and lots out there. I probably in the 10 years, I probably got about 4,000 hours of flight time.
Wow.
So not too bad, about 400 hours a year I averaged. Lots of Kiowa time and lots of Huey time out there. So we would use the Kiowa for regular patrol type stuff, me and a tactical flight officer. Tactical flight officer would operate the FLIR and the cop radios and all that stuff. And then in the Huey, we would use that for search and rescue. Basically, they didn't have much of a SAR program from the air side until I got there, and I kind of took what I had built over at Fallon. I brought that along with me, and we ended up doing a lot. I think I ended up with about 300 rescues in those 10 years. Wow. We get a lot of pickups and stuff like that, but these are like, had we not picked these guys up, they were going to die. So I had about 53 of those when I was out at Fallon in the 4 years I was there, but I came to Washoe County Sheriff's Office, and I brought that program along. We trained up we had a volunteer group of guys called the Hasty Team. So they're basically kind of like your technical search and rescue experts. I turned them into air crew. I put them through an air crew training syllabus that I built, and put them through a hoist training syllabus that I made. And we got them fully trained up in hoisting, and we started saving people. And, it was just a real blast. We had a great team, great group of guys, and all super dedicated. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great, great mission. The downside was the politics. Law enforcement is rife with it. So, for every good, there's a bad. And, after 10 years, I was tired of fighting tooth and nail to keep the program running because, when they always go for the low hanging fruit when there's a budget crisis, and a helicopter that's burning $1,200 an hour, they will quickly shut that thing down. So I got tired of that battle and decided I needed to take a break. So now I do some consulting, aviation consulting. Last month I trained up Sacramento Metro Fire guys in high altitude mountain flying and power management techniques. Have you ever been to HATS?
No, I
Ryan?
never made it out there.
Okay, yeah, fantastic course. And let me tell you, for a Navy guy to call an Army course fantastic, it's by God a fantastic course. I learned so much there in Eagle, Colorado, going through HATS. HATS stands for High Altitude Aviation Training Site. And it's where you go and you take your own helicopter there and they train you in power management techniques. And it is phenomenal. Yeah. Just one of the best courses I've ever taken.
Yeah, I've heard good things about it. We sent, typically just send our instructor pilots out there, because trying to send a whole Army squadron, send 90, 100 people, it's just not going to happen. But when I was at Bragg, before we flew to or went to Afghanistan, we've got the Smoky Mountains, which are nothing compared to Colorado, but we would set up some training out there, and the IPs would go to HATS, and then they'd come back and teach them those techniques. And then when we went to Afghanistan, ironically enough, I was commanding guys up in the mountains, and we were routinely up at 6, 7, 8,000 feet. And it's a school of hard knocks at that point of learning how to fly. And luckily, our job, we didn't have to land, so that was a benefit. But I've heard a lot of good things about that course.
Yeah, I tell you what, here in the Sierra Nevadas, the mountains up here, it's a lot like Afghanistan. We've got mountains, Stead Airport, where we operate out of, that's at 5,000 feet. Mm-hmm. So the mountains around us go up to 10, 12, 13,000 feet. Lake Tahoe's up in our area. So we spent a lot of time up there, and you're dealing with a single engine Huey helicopter. And you better know your stuff, because there's no quicker way to die than to not know what you're doing. Yeah,
the power management difference, just from again, coming from Bragg, which I think it's like 400 foot, MSL. And then when we were in Tarancout, it was around 4,500, just that difference of trying to take off on certain days and just being too heavy, or trying to land at a certain time. It's a big difference. And with a single engine aircraft, like you said, there's a lot of things that go wrong and not a lot of wiggle room to keep it in the right.
Oh, you bet. Yeah. So I do a lot of instructing with that. I'm a CFI, rotorcraft CFI. So I do a lot of mountain flying instruction using those techniques, and it pays off. I'm also an MVG instructor. So that's what I do now. On the civilian side, I do cybersecurity for this major defense contractor. I'm currently putting in for a job as their crisis management guy, so we'll see if I get that. But I keep flying. Of course, you never fly as much as you want to until you're flying too much. But I have my own aircraft. I've got a little experimental Zenith 750 STOL aircraft. It's ugly, but it's beautiful. You know what I mean? Yeah. It'll take off in 200 feet and land in about that as well. A little underpowered up here at 5,000 feet. It's only got a 120 horsepower engine on it, but it's still a lot of fun to dink around in. And then, of course, I get to fly that Cobra helicopter out of Carson City periodically, which is just a blast.
Yeah, I'm looking up the Zenith STOL to take a look at that. That looks like that would be. I mean, you could probably. You could land that anywhere, can't you? I mean, just with those wheels. Look, I mean, I don't know if you have the same kind here, but it's got some pretty robust wheels.
Yeah, I've got the kind of Tundra tires, they call it, and it's got those slats on the leading edge of the wing, so it'll get off the ground at about 28 knots, and it'll climb out at about 45, and it'll land at about the same. It stalls right at 28 knots. Wow. With those slats. So, it's a super survivable airplane. I mean, if you're going down, you can get it pretty slow before you hit, which is I'm told that's what you want to do. So
a good authority that you want to be slow.
yeah. Crash as slow as you can.
Yeah. What?
And fly all the way through it.
Yeah. So tell us about the Cobra. I mean, how did you get involved in all this?
Sure. So I had a mechanic working for me out there at Fallon, a guy named Tim, who was in the Marine Corps. He got out of the Marine Corps and started working as a mechanic for the civilian maintenance they have for the shore installations for the helicopters. So it's a squadron that has a civilian company doing their maintenance and all that stuff. He was a mechanic for them. He was also basically a QA rep, a quality assurance rep. He is also an A&P mechanic with his IA certificate. So he's about as high authority as you can go when it comes to helicopters. That the IA ticket, and I forget what IA stands for. It's something assurance. Anyways, it's a step above A&P mechanic. So he works part-time down at this museum, and they got a hold of this Cobra, and they were going to put it together, and they said, hey, we need somebody to fly this thing. And he calls me up and says, hey, Doug, do you want to fly Cobra again? Yeah. Does a chicken have a pecker? Yeah, I'm all over that. So we go down, and it's basically a skinny Huey. I've got, a couple thousand hours of Huey time, so it wasn't that hard to do the transition. It's got a SAS in it that the old UH-1H doesn't have, but it's not hard at all. The only downside to the Cobra, I would say, is you can't see your skids from the cockpit.
Right.
So you kind of hunt and peck for the ground a little bit. Yeah. I mean, you get used to how high you are off the ground compared to a Huey, but it just takes a little bit of getting used to. But it's a beast, man. It's got that 703 engine in it, which I think the Army called it wasn't the 13B, maybe it was the 17 engine. But it's a beast of an engine. It puts out 1,800 shaft horsepower, I believe it is, and it's got the Cobra tranny. It's got those big wide blades. Yeah. You can look it up. It's the Cactus Air Force Museum out of Carson City, and there's a picture of it in there. It's red and white because that was the original unit was out of Alaska that this helicopter was from, and they were painted red and white for whatever reason, like an Arctic paint scheme. And so I got a chance to fly it, and I've been flying it ever since. I've got maybe a couple hundred hours in them now. Wow. So yeah, we get to go out to air shows in the summer. Of course, this summer sucked, but because of COVID. But hopefully, this next summer coming up, I'll be able to fly that thing around some more and show it off.
Yeah, that's an incredible opportunity. That's great.
Yeah. I was surprised. I was really lucky. I was worried when I first got asked it. I called around to find somebody who was current in the Cobra, and I got hold of a guy who flew with the Forest Service because they were using Cobras as a platform for firefighting, right? Yeah, so they would be up there. They're called the Helco, so the helicopter coordinator. They would be up orbiting at about 2,000 feet, and they would vector in the helicopters. So I did a lot of firefighting when I was at the sheriff's office also. So I was carded as a fire pilot. But so I got a hold of this guy, and I said, hey, dude, I was wondering if you'd be willing to come down and check me out in the Cobra. He says, well, tell me what else you've been flying. I gave him the list of the aircraft and times that I've been flying. He says, well, you've got plenty of Huey time. I go, yeah. He says, it's nothing but a skinny Huey. You're fine. Yeah. Have fun. so that's kind of how that worked. Wow.
Oh,
yeah, it was awesome. Pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying though about not being able to see the skids. It was same when I went into Apaches, and same with the 58. I could look right down and see, and then you get in the Apache and you can't really see below you. So kind of hunting around and hoping you're in the right spot.
Yeah. So in the summer we pulled the doors off the Huey and the Cobra and the Kiowas and fly that way. That's the only way to fly, in my opinion.
Oh yeah. Yeah, unless it's super cold. But I'll throw the doors back on. I don't care if someone wants to call me a coward.
Yeah, it does get a little cold sometimes up here in the Sierras too. So
yeah, I can imagine. That's incredible. Well, that has been a whirlwind of a career. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had a good time just listening to it because I can only imagine how it was to live it.
It was a blast. And I tell you what, people say, hey, thanks for your service. No, thank you. I mean, thanks for the opportunity, really.
Yeah.
I mean, just the incredible opportunities you get in the military and in the civilian world, it's just amazing. And if you're given, somebody once said, hey, if somebody offers you something and you're not sure you can do it, say yes anyway and give it a shot. I firmly believe that. I've had a fantastic flying career. Yeah, I've come close to dying a few times, but who hasn't?
Yeah.
And anyways, how do you want to die?
Yeah.
Do you want to die, sitting in front of your computer and stroking out one day because you lost in Minecraft or something? Or do you want to, or do you want to live life? Live life. You only get one turn in the barrel, so let's make the most of it.
Well, what's wild is I didn't even notice it until I was editing that he had flown that aircraft where the engine had failed. So I didn't even catch that part. So listening to that again, just it's incredible. And I had something similar happen where I'd flown an aircraft and it was acting a little funky, and we brought it back and reported it, and I think same day somebody took that aircraft and kind of ignored some of the warnings and took off with it, and the hydraulics failed. So these things happen. They were fine, so that's why I can laugh about it. But it's just wild to think that would happen right after flying. It makes you start thinking too, like, wow, what did I miss, and what situations would that have happened? I don't know. Just makes you think. So it's tough. It can be a scary job. So I really appreciate Doogie coming on and sharing it with us. He was a lot of fun to talk to, and honestly, I probably could have spent another 3 or 4 hours. I definitely in the future want to have him back on and share some of those stories. So again, check out that Cactus Air Force Museum that he was talking about. We'll try and get some pictures up for that, and take a look at that Cobra. So I still need to find my way out there and get a flight with that thing. That would be pretty cool. So Doogie also shared some other stuff with us. Our bonus content for this one is just incredible, a lot of fun. So again, if you are in a position to financially support the show and you want to take a look at that bonus content, just check out our Patreon page. And I'm just going to share some of the topics that we talked about here. So I kind of write down little little notes to myself to kind of push the bonus content and kind of throw it out there on Facebook and the Discord and stuff, just to entice people like, hey, this is what you could be hearing about. So here are the notes that I wrote down. Bloody bird strike. You should always have your MVGs, and that was a crazy story. And of course, how to fist fight in your undies. So if you're interested in any of those things, take a look at our Patreon page. Again, it's linked on our website, thelowlevelhellpodcast.com. And you can support the channel and get access to that and all the other bonus content that we have. So again, every interview that we've done since, I want to say, episode 5 has bonus content. So it's good. It's a good time. It's a little bit more candid, I guess you could say, than the normal interviews are as well. All right. Well, again, we're just going to cut this one short. Don't have anybody co-hosting with me this time, and that's fine. It's a little awkward for me. It's just kind of talking to myself, but hopefully you guys can put up with all my nonsense and just enjoy what you did come here for, which is some great stories from some great pilots. I just want to thank you guys for watching. Again, thanks for all your support so far. Looking forward to some great episodes. I was mapping out all the people that I've talked to as far as guests, and I mean, it easily took me up into July, August timeframe, and that was not even including the sort of maybes that I've gotten, or the sort of the half-hearted yeses that I've received. And it seems like every day I'm talking to somebody else who's leading me to somebody else. So we've got a lot of stuff lined up here for the next several months, and I'm sure that's going to grow as the word gets out and talking to people. So please continue to listen and share with your friends. So I think that'll be it for this episode. We'll see you guys again in 2 weeks, and just a reminder that comments made by the guest and the host are our own and do not represent the Department of Defense or any private businesses. We appreciate you guys listening, appreciate all your support so far. Keep sending in those questions, and we'll talk to you guys in 2 weeks. Take care.